All right. Hi, everyone. As folks start to come in the interest of time, I would like to get started. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And yeah, here we go. All right. Ta-da. All right. So, hi everyone, welcome. I am excited to present on ethical engagement during virtual fellowships internships. And before I get started, I just want to give you a brief description of what you can expect from this session. So, as we all know, are continuing for a second year in a row, like virtual fellowships. And it is essential that organizations ensure that fellows are engaging in ethical practices while working with the community. So, this session will explore themes and data around ethical engagement, responsible engagement, as well as present a case study on FCDE's Culture Connections program. So basically, the Culture Connections program advanced intercultural learning and understanding between the American students from Fayetteville State University and HBCU in North Carolina and Ugandan university students to the shared experience of internship with rural Ugandan nonprofits. So, again, I want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Nishtha Yadav, and I was a 2020-2021 Princeton in Africa Fellow. After my fellowship concluded, I was hired as a staff member with FCDE, and now I serve as their communications and research manager. I was also a 2020 social entrepreneurship fellow, and I've worked in India, the United States, and now Africa with several nonprofits and educational institutions. So, all right, here we go. Usually, acknowledgements are towards the end of a presentation, but I feel like without these people, I wouldn't be able to put this together. So I want to give a big shout out to my FCDE team and to Dr. Keisha Abram, who's the founder and president of Abram Consulting Agency. She's an African diaspora scholar and a justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion educator. And I was also able to consult with a lot of current and former fellows, especially the virtual fellows who provided their perspective on this topic. So thank you to everyone. So in preparation for our breakout room sessions, after the presentation, I want to quickly share the questions that we're going to discuss so that you can be mindful as the presentation goes on and you can start thinking about these themes. The first question is to identify one technique, approach, method that your organization is utilizing to encourage ethical engagement during fellowships. And the second question is to identify one technique, approach, method your organization can employ to encourage ethical engagement, responsible engagement by fellows during their fellowships. So, based on my conversations with some of the current and former fellows and also my position as a previous virtual fellow, I compiled a list of challenges that fellows have faced during their virtual fellowships. And of course, this list is not exhaustive. And I was very cognizant of the fact that I want to include the challenges that relate to ethical practices, ethical engagement, responsible engagement. So to begin, the first being restriction with on-ground and field activities due to the pandemic. The second is interaction with the community is limited or through a facilitator, especially if the fellows are placed with host organizations in other countries. They might not get the opportunity to learn the languages the community speaks or are forced to ask the host organization staff to facilitate meetings, collect data, stories from the field, photographs, and so on. And with no ground activities, no stay with the host families, limited interaction with communities, intercultural understanding and integration can be a challenge. Not a priority during virtual orientation. I want to be very clear. This is not a dig against fellowship organizations because planning a virtual orientation is hard work. It's a real challenge, especially if your fellows are spread across different continents and or different time zones. So at times, because there is limited time and days, a virtual orientation tends to focus on say cohort or introduction, staff and alumni engagement, how to navigate virtual fellowships and different time zones if that's applicable. setting up goals and expectation for the fellowship year. Diversity can be a challenge because not everyone has access to stable internet or technology or has the luxury of working from home, and no curriculum around ethical engagement. So the current and former fellows I spoke with indicated that while responsible engagement sort of was not really discussed but mentioned, there wasn't an hour-long session or like a 45-minute discussion on the topic. So these are some of the challenges I could come up with when it came to virtual fellowships. So, based on that, I was able to also speak with about 20 current and former virtual fellows. And I know this the data set might be small, but I did not want to talk to one person from. I wanted to work with people with different fellowships, So I did not want to get responses from like 10 people from the same fellowship organization. So I spoke with about 20 people from different who served as different fellows with different organizations. And only 10% of the respondents said that their fellowship organization conducted a session on ethical engagement. And again, being very specific, this meant that there was a session devoted on responsible engagement and ethical practices. While 80% said that their fellowship organization mentioned responsible engagement, ethical engagement, but not in form of a separate session. So again, some of them said that it was mentioned that, the stuff is available. If you need to have a conversation, we're going to give you some tools and resources, or it was mentioned under an overarching theme, but there wasn't a separate session. It was maybe a 5 to 15-minute conversation under different themes. And 90% stated that their fellowship organization did not continue conversations around ethical engagement after the orientation, which meant there were no guest speakers, no resources or tools were shared after the orientation was completed. So based again on conversations and my personal experience, and again, working with Dr. Abram and everybody else I mentioned in my acknowledgement slide, I came up with some recommendations for virtual fellowships. But I truly believe these can also be implemented effectively for in-person fellowships. So conduct sessions with facilitators whose works centers around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I think ideally these sessions should be without the host organization staff and just with the cohort, so that the cohort feels more comfortable in asking questions and there's no room for judgment. That certain fellows might feel. Invite representatives from communities where the fellows will serve. And I think this would be great if we provide a platform to community leaders or members to share their experience with previous fellows, and as well as their expectations from the incoming cohort. I think we need to remember that the community needs to be at the center of all of this. Create accountability tools for fellows. And I think this was something that I was really thinking about, how we can do this without putting an additional financial burden on fellowship organizations. And the thing that I came up with is that a lot of fellowship organizations, like my alma mater, Princeton in Africa, run a fantastic mentorship program where they pair an alum with a fellow, so that fellow has some guidance throughout the fellowship year and they can share their challenges, feelings throughout the year. And I think if the fellowship organizations can come up with expectations and practices around responsible engagement and ethical conduct, and that can serve as a guide for the alum and fellow, there can be a lot of exchange of ideas under the mentorship program. And this is just one of many ideas we can think of. Screening at the application stage to check if the fellow is open to intercultural learning and understanding. So asking the right questions at the beginning, including, their intent for applying to the program, their humility, cultural competence, are they open to new ideas, new cultures? Set the tone for language and intention. I think fellowship organizations need to be more mindful and intentional in their approach. It cannot be taken for granted that fellows are already aware of what privilege means or what privilege they have, and most importantly, what ethical engagement entails. For instance, the language use needs to be inclusive. I've noticed, when referring to global South countries, a lot of times, or, referring to global South countries, the language is spoken there, the community that lives there, or the staff members that might work there, we tend to use the word local. And instead, I think there are various alternative words one can use, like the in-country staff, on-site team. If you're referring to a particular country, like say Uganda, where my organization is based at, you can say Ugandan. So I think intention needs to match the impact. And creating a mandatory session on ethical and or responsible engagement. And again, this needs to be a separate session. It cannot be a part of any other session to ensure that ethical conduct is at the front and center of any virtual fellowship or, in fact, any in-person fellowship as well. So from now, I will move on to the case study that I briefly mentioned at the beginning. So we started a Cultural Connections program this year, which was designed to advance intercultural understanding, build global workforce readiness, and support sustainable community development. So we had 4 students from Fayetteville State University and HBCU in North Carolina, and 5 from Ugandan universities that collaboratively participated in the program. It was an 8 weeks of cross-cultural community building, which included a 6-week internship with FCDE grassroots partners, which are nonprofits based in rural Uganda. So whether participating remotely, virtually, in case of our American interns, or in case of our Ugandan interns participating in person, the interns provided valuable pro bono support to Ugandan nonprofits while gaining practical work experience. And again, I have a quick note here. Our Ugandan interns worked remotely for a period of time due to the lockdown imposed in the country to curb the spread of COVID-19. And by embracing the virtual programming, we successfully engaged students in building bridges and replacing the idea of the foreign other with understanding and connection. So one of the ways we did this was by assigning each intern a counterpart. So American and Ugandan students were paired to work together with a Ugandan nonprofit host organization. So essentially, we had one nonprofit, we had a couple of projects, and we had one Ugandan student and one American student working collaboratively on those projects. Or one of the American interns, however, worked with 2 nonprofits, so she was assigned 2 different counterparts. And again, I just want to also quickly mention my role in the program, along with serving as the facilitator and presenter for the virtual orientation for the cohort. I was also the program coordinator, and I served as a channel of communication, sort of like a link between the cohort and various stakeholders in the project. So while crafting the Cultural Connections program, I think for us, it was vital to include an intercultural curriculum that was led by facilitators with lived experience of the communities represented by the participants. And these were also experts in facilitating international education curricula, centering on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we leaned into like a trust-based approach with Dr. Abram, who again I mentioned in my acknowledgements, and her South Africa-based colleague, Ronelle E. Stevens. And we developed a curriculum and led sessions on intercultural understanding and identity throughout the program. And I want to emphasize that they were the ones who created and implemented it. The facilitators created a very safe space for growth, for learning, for inquisitiveness for each of the participants. And every intern was referred to as a student leader, which inculcated a sense of purpose and belonging in the program, values of exceptional leadership, and boosted confidence. And I think like any other fellowship or internship program, we employed a number of icebreakers to foster an environment of engagement and bridge the gap between the Ugandan and American students. So we had breakout groups for peer learning, which is again very common. But the most uncommon icebreaker that I've experienced, to be very honest, I've been a part of several conferences and fellowship programs, as I mentioned in the beginning, was the name game, where we asked every participant to explain the origin of their name, what it meant to them, which evoked personal stories around family, resilience, courage, and ancestry. And once we spoke to all of our cohort after the internship was completed, everybody had the same opinion that this brought them closer as a group. They got to know a little bit about where they came, where their counterparts came from, what their life story is, who's been the inspiration in their life. There are people who've been named after their parents, grandparents, what it means to them. So that, I feel, was really, it was the way that our interns were honest and vulnerable really helped break the ice. I mean, yeah. And we also asked our cohort to draw their anxiety monster, where they reflected their fears on paper. And all these activities had a profound impact on the group. And I think they were able to navigate each other's culture a little better after all of these icebreakers. Another important part of the intercultural curriculum was the digital storytelling activity. To strengthen the cohort's connection, share lived experiences, student leaders were asked to create a 3-minute video which showcased a part of their lives. So the cohort had the complete creative freedom to do whatever they saw fit with their videos. It could be a series of incidents or an incident that impacted their lives, or narration, or putting together home videos and on photographs, or showcasing a day in their life and how it looks, or a day in their internship and how that looks. So there was complete freedom to do whatsoever they wanted to do, as long as it was for 3 minutes. And to celebrate the end of internship and of cohorts work on the community, we organized a virtual student film festival, and where we screened all these videos. And the invite was also extended to family and friends of the cohort, as well as our host organizations. And the videos were screened through a Zoom webinar, as well as simultaneously on our Facebook page. If anybody's interested to see those stories, can go ahead and watch them. As students shared their truth through the videos, it opened a door to each other's realities and intercultural understanding. The videos were stories of love, loss, childhood, family, triumph, courage, and heroism. I think I will just read from what one of our Ugandan student leaders said, Baluku Moses, who said, "When I viewed the digital stories, I found a level of commonality in all of our videos. We are family-oriented people, and even though we are from different backgrounds, everyone has overcome obstacles to be here today." And that's what we realized, that most of the videos actually were related to family and ancestry and where they come from and where they want to go. So there was a level of commonality that was established, and a lot of our fellows said that this shouldn't be towards the end. This should actually be at the beginning of the program, which I think we are planning to work into the next edition of the program. So here's the screenshot of the student leaders and the facilitators for the virtual student film festival. I'm on that top left corner. So the cohort practiced and exhibited cultural sensitivity throughout the program. So for instance, American interns spoke slowly during their virtual sessions to ensure that the Ugandan interns could hear them clearly. And this was something that I sort of mentioned during my virtual orientation session, that it is important for American interns to be very mindful of how they're speaking, because we want to have a very inclusive environment. And the Ugandan interns, meanwhile, were open to meeting late in the evening with their counterparts, keeping in mind the time difference between the continents. When the lockdown was implemented in Uganda, the interns faced technological challenges, including unstable internet, because they were working from home, and that really impacted their ability to meet with their counterparts. And that way, our American interns were very kind and offered support and flexibility when all of this was happening. Usually our Ugandan interns would come to the site office, but clearly that was not possible because the lockdown was quite strict. And since the American interns worked remotely, our Ugandan leaders, student leaders, were the eyes and ears on the ground. The Ugandan interns provided their counterparts with field notes, their perspective on the challenges faced by the community, and found ways to include the American interns in conversations. So, for instance, during one of the staff meeting, an intern from Uganda just connected with an American intern on WhatsApp and put her on speaker so that she could voice her opinion, she could hear what was discussed, and connect with other staff members in their host organization. So, what was the impact of the program on the student leaders? So, a level of respect and camaraderie was established among the cohort. While the Ugandan interns were really impressed with how their counterparts navigated their internship alongside childcare responsibility, classes, work. A lot of them had full-time jobs or part-time jobs, and even personal loss. The American interns learned from their Ugandan counterparts on field experience and felt that they gained community from another nation. And one of our American interns stated, myth that African and African Americans couldn't get along and engage is broken for me. And of course, the connection was very meaningful. All but one intern stated that they would like to stay connected with their counterparts after the internship. And one of the Ugandan interns beautifully put, I would like to keep in touch with my US counterpart as she has been an inspiration for me. As a father of young girls, I want my children to look up to her as a role model and achieve success in their lives the way she has. And just again to clarify a little bit about the background of the US counterpart without giving away too much information, she comes from a country in Africa and has overcome extreme barriers and has succeeded in doing a lot of things in her life, including getting a full ride scholarship to complete her undergraduate degree at one of the top universities in the US. Intercultural understanding between the students was realized, with most students accepting and adjusting to accommodate the others' differences in belief or work culture. Almost all voluntarily shared their personal lives and experiences. And I think our intercultural sessions received overwhelmingly positive feedback from our cohort. 78% of the participants rated their overall experience with Dr. Abram and Ms. Stevens as excellent, while the remaining 22% rated it as very good. And excuse me, the last impact, the last data that I have here, I think it's a very important win for our program because we started the program with this intention, with this goal to immerse interns into a new culture and foster an intercultural understanding, that they're able to do community building and expand excuse me, and expand positive transnational narratives. So we were very happy to see that 100% of the interns have an appetite for more cultural connections, and that a vast variety of the interns experienced cultural connections through this program. So during our exit survey, the end of the internship survey, we asked multiple questions, including if they could offer 3 keywords when talking about the intercultural curriculum. What is the valuable thing that they take away from it? And these were some of the recurring themes: equality, respect, refreshing, culture, personal, collaboration, live, session, and some other very interesting words that weren't featured prominently, but one of the things that I really liked was inspirational, appreciation, educative, transparency. So in conclusion, our program is an example of how ethical engagement can be facilitated through organizations to ensure that interns, fellows have a deep-rooted understanding of the culture, history, and life of the country they're working in. And most of the students pointed out that this project has had an immense impact on the understanding of their counterparts' culture, as I mentioned in our data points as well. In most cases, the cultural exchange came directly through their counterparts rather than from the host organizations that they were based at during the internship. It is important to note that the channel of communication between the cohort was opened by the successful implementation of the intercultural curriculum by Dr. Abram, Ms. Stevens, and the rest of the FCDE staff members. It also increased international service learning opportunities for African Arc College of Management Sciences. It is an educational institution in Uganda, and Fidewell State University and HBCU in North Carolina, and it built bridges between the universities through their students. And I would like to point out that 3 of our Ugandan interns were directly recruited through African Arc College of Management Sciences, while the other 2 were fresh graduates. This collaborative model of service learning has already garnered the interest of other universities, and FCTE has entered into a partnership with California State University, San Marcos, a minority serving institution, to work with a global studies professor in the spring of 2022. And before I end, I wanted to inform the audience that the Cultural Connections case study was built on data collected from interns and host organizations through exit interviews and the end of the internship survey. I conducted the exit interviews for all of our Ugandan interns. So as I end, I would also again bring up these questions for our breakout session. And I also want to say that I'm going to drop the link to the case study in the chat right now. You can also access it under the resources tab. I think it's on the left, right at the bottom. If you're interested in learning more about how we created the intercultural curriculum, how we even found Dr. Abram, and how the implementation process was and what we learned. So I'm going to put that in the chat, and that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you being here, and I think we can we have about 15 people here, about 16 people here. So I don't think we have to actually go into different breakout rooms. Jasmine, if it's okay, I think we can bring people here and we can discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. So folks, if you want to come to screen, go ahead and just click that share audio visual button in the top right-hand corner, and we can bring you up to screen and just open it up for some discussion.
I want to give a shout out to Amina, who actually works with Princeton in Africa and was my staff contact when I was a fellow. So hi, Amina, it's great to see you, and I appreciate you being here and everyone else being here. So if you are okay with, you can also come without your videos, and if I see you pop into moderation, I can just add you. I think, right, Jasmine, we can do that,
yes.
Right?
Yep. We'll see folks who want to share. And can just bring them to screen.
Okay.
Feel free to share in the chat as well with these questions that we have up on the presentation.
Yeah. I think, Jasmine, we can also turn off the recording, because if people are more comfortable sharing their views without being recorded, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, let me see if we can do that. See, Trina is up on the screen.
And I can also put the questions in the chat if anybody's interested in sharing through the chat. That could be, not everybody wants to be on on camera, so I understand.
Hello?
Hi, Trina. We can hear you.
Hi. Okay, great. Thanks for this presentation. It's really interesting. And so the program I work on is a program that brings international teachers to the U.S., and so it's a little bit of like the flip side of bringing international people to the U.S. versus U.S. people being in spaces abroad. But it's interesting for me to kind of think about some of the things you were talking about and how it would apply to our fellows, because I do think it's really important for our fellows to have a good understanding of the context of the communities they're in the U.S. And the different histories that are in their communities. And I also think that, we obviously have a responsibility to provide them with an ethical fellowship. One of the specific things I was thinking about that you were mentioning was, I think we often use a lot of kind of jargon in explaining different program policies to them. And I don't know that it is always understood because some of them might not be familiar with that kind of jargon. And I think it's really important to make sure that our fellows are understanding the terms and conditions of the program in a way that's accessible to everyone, and not, something that's just kind of like robot terminology speak, because there are things that impact them and financially while they're on the program. And I just think it's really important that they have an understanding of how to have a successful program. And I think it's our responsibility to make that, easy for them.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Trina. Appreciate your inputs and insights here.
Thanks.
So I can answer Rebecca's question, if that's okay, how we found Dr. Abram. So actually, once we decided that we wanted to do a Cultural Connections program, I think our first link was with the Fayetteville State University in North Carolina. And I think one of their contact persons, Dr. Sharmila, was very active, and she was actively working with, scholars in African diaspora. And she found her through a conference and connected us with her. And it was like peanut butter and jelly. It worked really well. So I think it's all about making connections. And I'll be happy to put the link to Dr. Abram's agency right here so you can access and see her previous works. I'll be happy to do that in the chat. But again, everybody, if anybody's interested in answering the breakout room questions or just sharing your general thoughts about ethical engagement and responsible engagement, as Jasmine said, please click on the share video and audio button. You can also come without the video as Trina came on. So yeah.
I think one thing I'd love to chat about is I work on a program with primarily Spanish-speaking fellows, or Spanish as their first language. But we also work with a small group of fellows within that larger cohort who are from the Caribbean and have more English-speaking background. And it's been a challenge of sometimes in sessions we'll have a chat going and the chat switches to Spanish and our other fellows don't feel as included. But we also want to be respectful in the way and the language we use when we approach, please use English in these sessions. And so that's been a challenge in terms of just having, an equitable approach to engagement. Oftentimes we want to make sure we have that sense of community, but it seems like our fellows kind of get grouped into different groupings. So I don't know if any folks on the call have experienced something similar to that, but that's been a challenge for us to make sure that engagement is inclusive.
Okay, sorry. Technology error. Yeah, so I think one thing that I can say about the Cultural Connections program was when we were doing the virtual orientation, a lot of our Ugandan interns looked lost. And I think that's where our, alert went high. And, once we had Dr. Abram and Ronell come in, I think it was very important to have some separate sessions with our Ugandan interns to sort of even explain the jargon, because for them, they couldn't understand intercultural understanding. And then that was something that, okay, we need to break it down what it means. So I think for us, it was like taking those additional sessions and making sure that they grasp the concept. But I would be, again, very curious to know what other people have to say here, only because our next cohort will be, a lot of them will be Latinos. So I'm very curious to hear if anybody has some inputs or how they've run the program. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for inviting me up here, and thank you for your presentation. I really loved the name Origin Game, and I would definitely apply that one. It's a wonderful also in terms of cross-culture engagement. So I think what I'd like to add is it really depends on what type of program or fellowship you run, whether it's more of an instructional one, or in our case at the German Marshall Fund is very much a peer network. So at the beginning of the cohorts, we engaged them in an ethical exercise where they developed their own ground rules themselves of how they will behave and how they will behave with each other during their fellowship program, so they can hold themselves accountable with each other. So it's not just instructive and it's not just top down, but they come up with it themselves. And also, so it's cross, we either have Americans traveling together or we actually have Europeans traveling together. And the Europeans is quite interesting because also within different parts of Europe, they're very different cultural behaviors. Northern Europe versus Southern Europe, Central Eastern Europe, so different histories, different political systems, and so on. So that is a very, very good way for us to bring them together. And again, it's not just top-down instructive. It's they come up with the ground rules themselves. I also like what you said about the intercultural competency and the language, and it's something I often have to remind our US participants who with a certain understanding travels to Europe expecting everybody to speak their language, and then they don't. Or they may not, or there is, there are terms being used or language being used, which is literal translation, which you would not use in the same way in the US. And it's as simple as between the UK and the US, where there's sometimes language still applied in the UK, which you will not use in the US because it is politically insensitive, particularly when it comes to politics of identity. So, and that sometimes I either have to say, just be aware that these, there are cultural differences, and English may not be always the first language. So that's just, I wanted to share that one. Thank you.
I was going to say something similar about group norms that we established at the beginning of trainings. And this hasn't been so much of an issue for us recently, given the format of our trainings in virtual times. But back when we had larger in-person gatherings, we did sort of have a group norms up front that please, everyone speak English. Not that those other languages are bad, but just this is the common language that we all share. And then I'd say one of the other group norms that has been that one of our facilitators introduced that we've kept using for several years is this idea of ouch and educate, that if someone says something that offends you or doesn't sit right with you, that you use that as an opportunity to say, that comment hurt me and here's why, and use it as an opportunity to educate, and then the other person also has a chance to hear you out and sort of understand more or educate you about where they're coming from. And so that's been one of our group norms established. And then I also wanted to add that I liked the idea you guys had of the video a day, or a video about their lives. We do something kind of similar during orientation, and this only you need to have the right amount of time, and it can be kind of time consuming if you don't plan it out carefully. But having everyone do a presentation about their country, if you have a lot of different countries in the group. And they're really quick. We're this is 5 minutes or 7 minutes, about your country. And it's really short, but it does give people a chance to learn a little bit about other countries. And we have a standard format that they follow. And then they're also supposed to do a presentation to their host organizations about themselves. So, and that's a requirement of our host organizations, that they have to have the fellow do a presentation to their team or their staff or something like that. So those are some of the tactics we use. I think you're muted.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Meredith. I think, Meredith, this is something we've learned through the program as well, that the video that we did, once it was completed, They were like, we got to know each other so well. Why didn't we do this at the orientation? Because then work would have been so easy and seamless, and we took like forever to get to know one another. So I think, moving in the spring 2022, I think we're trying to do this particular activity that you've been doing as well in the orientation, so that there's a chance for connection and some knowledge sharing and idea sharing. So, but I appreciate all of you sharing. Thank you so much. Anyone else? We do have a couple more minutes, right, Jasmine?
Yeah. I believe this session technically goes until 11:30, but if we need to wrap up, we certainly can, or really just whatever works best for you.
Okay. Yeah, I think I would love to stay on for a couple more minutes and see if anybody wants to answer questions that they are in the chat. If anybody's interested in sharing particular ethical engagement practices that they've been conducting throughout their program, or anything else related to the presentation, I think that would be great. I think we can hang around for a little bit, and otherwise we can say bye. I think one of the things that I also wanted to throw out, if anybody is interested in talking a little bit about it, is that do you talk about responsible engagement or ethical engagement during your orientation or after the orientation is conducted? If anybody has some thoughts about it and how they do it, please feel free to share your audio, video, and we can put you, we can have you here with us, or you can put it in the chat. This is like a couple of questions that we've been thinking about. Yeah.
One thing as you've been speaking, I've been thinking about, I think we touch on a lot of different pieces of this in our orientations, but we don't actually title it or call it something like ethical engagement. And I think that might be an important step, rather than just saying, here's how we're respectful in group settings, or this is how we're going to, but really creating space of, we're actually focusing and centering this conversation around ethical engagement might help, because I think we're doing a lot of it. It's just kind of dispersed and not as organized as it probably could be to have a further impact in our programming.
And I think that's I think Meredith also said that they don't use the term ethical engagement. So I think when I was speaking with a lot of fellows, and I spoke with 20 different fellowships, because I wanted to include everyone's opinion, was the same thing. It's I don't know if I heard these words, responsible engagement, ethical conduct, because a lot of the focus during virtual orientation was just putting everyone together in one box. Technically, Zoom is a box, and putting everyone together in one box and just making sure we know how we have to work with the host organization, or how we're going to contribute to the mission of the fellowship program. But I think that's something that's very interesting and something to ponder upon for fellowship organization and for organizations like ourselves who are engaging in some sort of intercultural understanding and learning. So thank you for sharing that. Anybody else who wants to share? This is a space you could talk about. I think I think we've discussed everything I wanted to say, I think we can wrap this up so that people have an opportunity to experience other breakout rooms as well and take a little break before they go into next sessions. But again, thank you to you, Jasmine, for being here and for helping me out with the presentation, and to everyone else who participated and listened so actively. I think active participation, active listening is where we begin. So thank you so much, everyone. And I hope the rest of the summit goes well for you. And yeah, thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.